אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא, לעת נעשה בחפצו כל. אזי מלך שמו נקרא, ואחרי ככלות הכל.
So welcome back to the weekly Torah perspective after the Pesach break, where we took a little bit of a breather. We are now resuming our weekly shir, and Bli Neder, I'll endeavor to post the recording of this shir every week, as we have done before Pesach. And I will also want to thank our host, who wishes to remain anonymous, and those who take the trouble to come and participate in the shir, Ba'asher Husham, here around the table, with whom I interact by glances and sometimes a little joke, which possibly can be understood by the people here, and not necessarily by you, anonymous friend, who watches this on YouTube. Anyway, two different subjects this week. On the one hand, we have our Sedre, or rather our Sedres, plural, because it's this week a double Sedre, Tazria-Metzora. And on the other hand, the period of the year that we live in, the period of Sfiras Omer, the counting of the Omer, and the trajectory from Pesach to Shavuos, which is marked by the counting of 7 weeks, 49 days, which is a transition. It's a process, and I want to speak about that process and how we can find traces of that also in the parsha of Tazria-Metzora. I also want to connect it to the end of last week's Seder. The end of last week's Seder speaks about the various foodstuffs, the various animals that we cannot eat. And these animals are called behemoths tameos, or chayas tameos, or shrotzim tameim. They're called unclean beasts, or unclean wild animals, or unclean creepy crawlies. And this week's Seder starts also with matters of tumah and tahara, of purity and impurity. I'm using the word purity and impurity as an imperfect translation of the Hebrew terms. Those of you who have heard earlier talks know that I do not like translations. Translations are not covering what the word actually means. So from time to time I will quote a Hebrew word, I will sometimes spell it out, and then give a translation. Please do not rely on the translation. Try to listen to the Hebrew word. There's one word that features enormously in this week's Seder, Tazria and in Metzora. The main subject of these two Seders is the matter of tzoraas, which is usually translated as leprosy or something like that. It doesn't mean leprosy. That's one thing is for certain. It certainly doesn't mean leprosy. It is something else. And what it is very mysterious. It is an affliction that shows itself physically on 3 different places. It shows itself on the skin of a human being, and that made people think that maybe it's talking about something like a skin rash or even leprosy. That's not the word that the Torah uses for it. The Torah calls it nega tzoraas. And so one place is on the skin. The other place is on clothing. Also, clothing can become metzora, can become afflicted with tzoraas. And the third place is the walls of a house. A house can also have these spots on the walls, and they are a symptom of the affliction of tzoras that has hit the house. All these afflictions are called nega, nun, gimel, ayin. You want to know what the word nega means? You have to look at all the related words. There is a verb, lingoa, nogea, right? You have a saying in Hebrew, he's nogea badover, the matter concerns him, meaning he cannot be trusted in a certain matter because he has an interest in the matter. He's not disinterested. That is nogea badover. It literally, or if you look for a literal translation, you would probably call it something like touching. So a nega is a touching. Something touches you. And it touches you where? It touches you either on the skin or on your clothes or on the walls of your house. The word nega in that form as the singular occurs time and time and time again in these two settlers, Tazria-Metzora. It occurs only one other place in the entire Chumash. The plural negaim occurs in other places, but the singular nega occurs in this week's two settlers and in one other place. Where is this other place? This other place is in Parshas Bo. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu announces to Moshe Rabbeinu that there will be one more plague to hit the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, the language of the pasuk is Vayomer Hashem al Moshe od nega echod ovi al Paro v'al Mitzrayim achrei chen yishalach eschem mizeh כשלחו kolo goresh yogoresh eschem mizeh. Once more, I read the pasuk once more, listen carefully. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe od negel echot ovi al Paro v'al Mitzrayim achrei chen yishalach eschem mizeh כשלחו kolo goresh yogoresh eschem mizeh. I'll give you an attempt to translation. Hashem said to Moshe, one more touching, nega, I will bring on Paro and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go. Not he will send you out, but he will let you go. Mizeh, from this place. Keshalacho kolo, when he will utterly expel you or let you go. Goresh yogoresh eschem mizeh. He will completely remove or exile or drive out you from mizeh, from zeh. The normal language in Hebrew would be mipo, from here. It says mizeh. And we will remember this expression mizeh, which is repeated in this pasuk. Yishalach eschem mizeh, and then yogoresh eschem mizeh.
From the nega.
One possible interpretation would be he will release you from this plague. But the simple meaning of the verb is that zeh refers to Mitzrayim, and it has an echo in the request that Yosef gave to his brothers when he was about to die. He said, he promised that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would certainly redeem them, Pokaut Yifkaut, he will certainly visit you or pay attention to you, and when you leave here, will you take my bones with you? And that the language is there also mizeh. Mizeh. Egypt is called zeh, this over here. Okay, keep this in mind. The connection with last week's the story of the prohibitions of the animals that we can and cannot eat has to do with eating. Clearly, it has to do with eating. We have just behind us a period, Pesach, which is completely centered on eating, on not eating chometz, and the one mitzvah of eating that we have left, since there is no Beis HaMikdash, we cannot eat the meat of the korbanos, we cannot bring the shlomim, which you can eat. But we have one mitzvah min haTorah, one biblical commandment left of eating, and that's achilas matzah. The transition from Pesach until Shavuos is marked by Sfiros HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, the enumerating of these 7 weeks. And we call it Omer. Why do we call it Omer? Because it is kicked off by a korban which was brought the day after Pesach, meaning the first day Chol Hamoed, which for us, of course, is the second day Pesach, but biblically it is the day after Pesach, min mochras Shabbos, from the day after Pesach. We start to count these 7 weeks, and this day is marked by the korban or Omer, by the bringing of the sacrifice of the Omer, which is the firstlings of the barley harvest. When we, at the end of the 7 weeks, after 49 days, on the 50th day, it will be Shavuos, it will be the festival of weeks. And the Torah is very explicit that it is Ad Yom Aviachem, the day that you will bring the Shtei Alechem, the 2 loaves of bread. That is the specific offering of Shavuos. There's a huge difference between barley and wheat. Barley is machal behemoth. Barley is the fodder for animals. Whereas bread is made from wheat, not from barley. Barley we use for whiskey, by the way. And if you think that says you something about people who drink a lot of whiskey, that they maybe have something animalistic about them, it's not entirely untrue. That doesn't mean that you can't enjoy a glass of whiskey, but we need to keep in sharp focus the difference between machal odom and machal behemoth, the way that a human being eats and the way that an animal eats. We find this already very early in the Torah, when Odom and Chava, after the Avera, after the transgression of eating the wrong thing, eating from the tree. One opinion is that that was indeed wheat that they were eating. There is a difference of opinion in Gemara, whether it's wheat, whether it's olives, whether it's... funnily enough, I don't think that the apple is particularly prominent there in our midrashim. I may be mistaken, but there are some say it was an esrog. But one opinion is it's wheat. It's wheat. They have this transgression. They eat this fruit that they shouldn't have taken, and then the punishment for Adam is that when he needs to produce food by agriculture, by plowing and by sowing and by harvesting, this will be bezers apechel, because the earth will be reluctant to give its fruit. Kauts v'dada, it is called thorns and thistles it will bring forth for you. There is a Gemara in Masechet Pesachim, interestingly enough, in Pesachim, in the chapter which is called Arbe Pesachim, that when Odom heard, Kauts v'dada, when he heard this curse of thorns and thistles, he was, the language in Gemara is Noflu Ponov, his face fell, meaning he was greatly disturbed. And he said, will I and my beast now eat from the same trough? Have I been reduced to eating Kauts v'dada, thorns and thistles, as if I'm an animal? the Gemara continues there and says, when he heard Bezeas apecho tochel lechem, when he heard in the sweat of your brow you will eat bread, niskaru dater, his mind was put at rest. Because there's a difference between man and beast. An animal eats simply to survive. Every living organism in the world needs to eat. It's one of the prime urges of any living being. Even a one-cell organism swims around and tries to find the sugar molecule that it needs to consume in order to survive. I've mentioned it in earlier talks that the process of eating is a very, very, very misunderstood process. We think that we need the stuff that we eat in order to build up our body. This is a complete fallacy. It cannot be true. It cannot be true on simple physical grounds. If you ingest stuff and you don't excrete just as much as you ingested, you will grow fatter. Some people do, but ideally that's not what we do. We eat to maintain our body, but not by the stuff that we eat, because we excrete just as much as we eat. What is it then that we need in that food? Well, there is a difference between what is called high energy food and low energy excretion. What we get out of the food, again, naively you would think, oh, we need the energy in the food. Also, that is not true, because energy is conserved. This is a law of nature. And if energy enters any system, your house or your body, and it doesn't leave again, that entity, whether it's your house or your body, will heat up and will disintegrate, it will be boiled. If the earth receives sunlight and it doesn't radiate out infrared radiation just as much as it absorbs from the sun, the oceans would heat up, they would boil off in a runaway greenhouse effect, and this is, scientists say this is exactly what happened to the planet Venus, which is today a hell house. And the oceans, they say once upon a time it had oceans, and the heat got trapped and boiled off the oceans. And today the temperatures on Venus are very, very high. Okay, that's just an aside, a scientific aside, but I want to impress on you that that is not what we get out of food. We get neither stuff nor energy. What we get from the food is its beauty and its organization. The fact that it is built up out of useful molecules, and what we excrete is useless molecules. The difference is how useful is it. This is all it is. In another language, it's information, because things that are useful are organized and things that are useless are chaotic. Just the same as if you have a collection of stamps. If they're well organized in an album and they're neatly in chronological order and they're sorted in categories, that is a much more valuable possession than just a box in which you dumped all kinds of post stamps. No stamp collector collects his post stamps by throwing them in a box. He organizes them. Your work environment. Some of you may be familiar with how you organize your tools. If you have to do a job, to organize your tools is the beginning of your job. If your toolbox is just a bundle of items thrown together, there's not much use, you can't find things, etc. This is in general the case. On a purely biological level, the way that life continues to be viable is by being well organized. And that is an uphill battle. It is rowing against the stream. That phenomenon is physically called the increase of entropy, but I'm not going to bore you with that. I would love to give you a series of talks on this fascinating subject and its connection with Jewish spirituality, because it is a very important subject, but it would bring us too far today. Let it just remain in your mind that in order to be, in order to live, in order to continue living, you have to keep yourself together. Once your body starts getting disorganized, your gums are not holding your teeth in place, you will lose your teeth. Your cells do not defend themselves against invaders, you get an infection. The way that tumors, loyalenu, no one should get one, but the way that tumors destroy your body is by having a wild growth that is out of control. Control is the beginning and the end of staying alive. Not only physically, but spiritually likewise. I do not like the distinction between physicality and spirituality. I think it is a mistaken dichotomy, because it tends to ignore the spiritual aspects of physicality and the physical aspects of spirituality. Jewish spirituality is never airy-fairy up there somewhere. It always gets its form in what I like to call an embodied life. That's why we sanctify the way we eat. That's why we sanctify our sexuality. That's why we sanctify the relationship between parents and children. That's why we sanctify our social life, the way we lend money, the way we do business. It is all part of our spirituality, because there is no area of human life that is untouched by Jewish spirituality. It is all part and parcel of a way of life. This way of life makes it necessary to interact with our environment. We constantly need to exchange. Let's start with physicality. We're talking about eating. There is no more direct contact between us and our environment than the fact that we take from our environment and put it in our mouths and eat it. And life is not compatible with being isolated. Life is not compatible with being isolated. You want to kill somebody, you don't want to shoot him, you don't want to hang him, you don't want to stab him, you don't want to strangle him. All you have to do is put him in solitary confinement and have some robot deliver his food. If the jailer delivers his food even once a day, that's human contact. That will keep him alive. But if he's completely isolated, he's guaranteed to die. No man can live like that. No man, no woman, no human being can live like that. The Gemara says it. O gevruse, o misuse. Either company or death. And this brings us to the Metzora. Because we say that the Metzora nechshav k'meis. A Metzora, somebody who is afflicted by tzoras, is nechshav k'meis. He's considered as if he's dead. And in fact, even the physical likeness between a Metzora and a dead body is striking. What is tzoras? It's a white discoloration of the skin. It is as if he's pale like a corpse. And the degree of tumor that is associated with tzoras is called avi avos hatumor, the granddaddy of all impurities. There's only one other form of tumor that is called avi avos hatumor, and that is tumas mes, the impurity that is spread by a dead body. In a sense, the Metzora is a living dead man. Why is this? Well, he needs to, or she needs to leave the camp, needs to live outside the camp in isolation. And if you listen to the one story that we have about the Metzora in the entire Chumash, there's only one case of a Metzora in the entire Chumash. That's Miriam. When Miriam spoke in an inappropriate way about Moshe Rabbeinu, she was struck with tzoras. And Aaron, her brother, asked Moshe, I'll read the passage to you, Al no sehi kames, let her not be like a dead body. Betseisar merechem imal, when he exits from the womb of his mother, vaye ochel chatzi v'soral, and half his flesh is consumed, is eaten away. The imagery is here of a stillborn baby. This is striking, that when Aaron talks about Miriam's status as a Metzora, he compares her to a dead person, but not just a dead person who has lived and now died. No, about a stillborn person, a person who has not been even born alive yet. And this is a fantastic hint in how we understand that our seders this week do not start with the matter of a Metzora, they start with the matter of Tumas Ledor, as the impurity that comes from being born. The impurity that the birth process infer, or that the woman who gives birth incurs by the process of childbirth. Because every human being comes into the world as a mortal human being. The birth of a child is a direct confrontation with death. It sounds paradoxical, but it is. If you think about it, it can be understood. A mother who gives who gives birth to a child, actually, if everything goes as she prays it will be, that her child will grow up, will live, will develop, that child will bury her. The fact that she can leave a child in the world is somehow an antidote against her own mortality. She leaves children in the world. All of us who have children know this. Your children are your life after you have passed from this world. That's what they are. So when your children are born, it's a very, very joyful occasion, but it's also a confrontation with your own mortality. That the affliction of tzoras shows itself on the skin, on the clothes, and on the walls of the house has to do with the fact that these three surfaces, the skin, the outside of your clothes, and the walls of your house, all three are interfaces between you and not you. Your skin, quite clearly, is an interface between you and the rest of the world. That's where you end and the rest of the world begins. That's why it's called a nega, when you touch that interface, when you interact with that interface and there is something wrong with that interaction, the result is tzoras. The clothes are the next layer of isolation between you and the world, and the walls of your house, as instinctively can be understood, are another layer of that insulation. All those barriers should be like the walls of a cell. The walls of a cell keep the cell protected against the environment, because the truth is, if the cells of our body wouldn't have walls, they would rust away in the oxygen in the atmosphere already. So the invention of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way he created the world, that cells are surrounded by a cell membrane, by the walls of the cell, keeps us alive. On the other hand, the cell cannot be completely isolated from its environment, because its whole function is to do things, to interact with the environment. Therefore, it is a semi-permeable separation. That's what the cell wall is. That's what our skin is. Our skin is breathing. The interface that we have with our environment needs to be, on the one hand, protective. On the other hand, it must allow for this interaction. The same goes for our clothes, which stands as a symbol of our station in life. That's what we look like. It cannot push people away. It must delineate who you are, but it must allow for interaction. And the walls of your house, the walls of your family, the way you protect your family against outside influences cannot be a leaden wall that allows nothing to come in. You must interact with your environment. But that interaction must be a correct one. And this is where the word tzoras can be understood. Tzoras, if you analyze the word tzadeh, reish, ayin, are the root letters. And they fall into two groups, the tzadeh and the reish, which means constricted or limited, but it also means tzura, to have a form. And the letters reish, ayin, which means wrong. Tzoras is a disfigurement of the human appearance in the world. It's a disfigurement in how you interact with the world. Therefore, tzoras is associated with the spiritual failings of lashon hora, bad speech. When speech is one of the prime ways in which we interact with each other, if that speech is contaminated, if that speech is defiled, if that speech is no longer, it's either malevolent. It's either malevolent truth or it is outright lies. Both are forms of lashon hara. Second category is called motzi shemra, but it's the same phenomenon. It is a corruption of human language. That's one sin that is associated with tzoras. The other one is haughtiness, is elevating yourself above your fellow human beings. Usually, haughtiness is caused by a lack of self-esteem. People who have proper self-esteem do not need to be haughty. They know where they stand in life, and they have no. You think Moshe Rabbeinu is called Onof Mikol, although he is the most humble of all people. You think he didn't know he was Moshe Rabbeinu? Of course he knew he was Moshe Rabbeinu. His anivus is that he knew exactly who he was. He didn't have to pretend to be anything else than what he is. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is called an Onof. And paradoxically, we say it every Motzei Shabbos in the Psukim of Yitim Lecho, we say that everywhere where you find HaKadosh Baruch Hu's pride, you find his humility, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's pride and his humility are identical to itself. He knows exactly who he is. He's, in fact, the only entity I wanted to say the only entity in the whole of the universe, but that's incorrect because he's not part of this universe. He is the only being who knows exactly who he himself is. This self-knowledge, we have it to a certain extent. That's why we are B'Tselem Elohim. That's why we are in the image of God, because we have a certain amount of introspection which is possible for us. No animal has ever thought about himself or herself or itself as, well, I'm a horse. What does it mean to be a horse? No, a horse is simply a horse. But the human being asks himself the whole time, what am I here for? What am I doing here? What is the purpose of my life? There's nothing more human than that. Tzoras then is a corruption of the interface between us and our environment. The cure for that is to go outside of that environment, to find a new way of re-entering society. Metzora is not banned for life. He comes back. After he is healed from his tzoras, he comes back and he's welcomed back in the community. As Moshe Rabbeinu also prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take Miriam's tzoras away, and then she was gathered back among her people. There's one more connection that I want to make, and that is with the procedure that the settler describes what the ritual is by which the Metzora is healed or is purified from its impurity, from the impurity of the Tzoras. After the physical symptoms have disappeared, he's not ready yet. He has to undergo this procedure, and it's a very weird procedure. There are two birds, one bird is killed, the blood is put in water, in a vessel, and then a red thread is thrown in, and a bunch of hyssop is taken and put in that bloody water and sprinkled on it. It's very, very weird. I heard this week a shiur by one of my heroes, the American Rabbi David Foreman, who pointed out a very interesting connection between that and the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach also has the same phenomenon of the hyssop. The way the blood of the Korban Pesach was put on the door was by dipping the bundle of hyssop in that blood and smearing it on the side post and on the lintel and on the threshold of the house. And the two birds, the one bird that dies are the begonim of Yisroel, of Mitzrayim, and the bird that is let free is the Jewish people who left Mitzrayim. He brings an interesting comparison between this symbolism of the procedure of the Metzora and the Korban Pesach, and he connects it to what we started with, Out Nega Echod Ofi Al Paroi. One more nega I will bring on Paroi, and that is the death of the firstborn. And the death of the firstborn has the form for Yisrael as a birth process, because the door through which they leave Mitzrayim is surrounded by blood. They are born in blood. They are born, and they have to stay in their houses the whole night until daybreak, and then they rush out. Then they go out. It's exactly like a baby in the womb of the mother who stays for 9 months in the womb of the mother, cannot leave, but when the moment of birth comes, is rushed out. I've been told by people who know about these things that actually the process of being born, going from living inside the womb of the mother and to start to live outside the womb in the environment, to leave that darkness and to come into the light of the world, is very much like the process of dying. In fact, the physical symptoms in the baby are that the blood circulation in the womb goes one way because it goes through the placenta, and as the baby is being born, the entire blood circulation has to stop and go in the opposite direction. I've never known this, but I've been told that this is the medical truth of being born. It is as if you die, and in fact you do die. Your life inside the womb ends, and you enter a new phase of life. If we can all live our life in the correct interaction with our environment, regulated by the Jewish way in which our embodied life gets formed, and it is not a tzura ro'o, a bad form, but it is a tzura tova, we will be healed from any spiritual affliction, which is called Metzora. By the way, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu out nega echod ovi al paro, paro are of course the same letters as ra, a bad mouth, right? Which is another connection between nega, tzoras, and lashon hara. I leave it at this. There is many, many more things to say, but look, there's always another shmuz next week. I wish you good Shabbos.
והוא היה והוא הווה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה